Immigration is a big, big problem in this country, illegal immigration. And it's going to take some very creative policymakers and work on both sides of the aisle to get some solutions to move forward. But we have to ask ourselves the question, is there a conservative position on immigration? And this is what our next panel is going to talk about. Some very, very talented panelists, people from actually that are not going to probably disagree in some ways. I'm going to introduce a friend of mine and the most recent, and I think one of the most funny and witty Fox News contributors and who also writes for Town Hall and Hot Air, Guy Benson.
How we doing? We're still alive out there? We're still awake? It's been a good program so far, and we're going to have some fun here talking about immigration. Just shameless plugs. Any of you guys read townhall.com? Awesome, thank you. Any of you guys watch Fox News Channel? Great, appreciate it. It is so good to be here in St. Louis. I actually went to college up in Chicago at Northwestern, and I've got a good buddy of mine who's still in Chicago. He's a liberal and he's a Cubs fan, which I describe as double-barreled sadomasochism. And when I told him I was coming to St. Louis for this event, he scoffed and sort of snidely remarked, yeah, have fun, as if there's nothing to do in St. Louis. So I just reminded him of three things. First, there's this magical product known as beer. And you guys do it really well here. So I was excited about that. Second, there's a franchise known as the St. Louis Cardinals. And I just had to refresh his memory that the Cardinals are in first place in 30 games over 500, whereas his beloved Cubs are in last place in 30 games below 500. And I decided it would be too cruel to point out that the Cards have won 11 World Series since World War I, whereas the Cubs, let's just leave it at that. I think we know the answer to that question. And finally, I twisted the knife just a little bit because, as I mentioned, he's a Democrat. I said it'll be so refreshing for me to be in the only swing state in America that sniffed out Barack Obama from day one and rejected him twice. So congratulations on that foresight. So the title of the panel, I think, is intriguing. Is there a conservative position, a single conservative position, on immigration reform? I would submit to you that there is not. But let's engage in a quick exercise doing a show of hands, 4 options. You can vote more than once. This is sort of like Chicago. You can vote as many times as it sounds right to you. I'm going to describe a quick position on immigration. Raise your hand if you agree with it. So, number 1, immigration reform should begin and end only with border security and case closed. Okay? How many of you would say reform is necessary, but not in a comprehensive bill? It should be broken up into piecemeal, bite-sized pieces, okay? How many would say, actually, comprehensive reform is possible, but the only way it's acceptable is if the border is secure first, okay? And finally, how many would say that the Senate bill that they recently passed, the so-called Gang of 8 bill, may be imperfect, but it is at least a decent start? Okay. I saw 1 or 2 hands. I won't call you out. I saw 1 or 2 hands for that last one. But my point is that there were hands raised for all 4 of those, which to me underscores, I think, the point that there is not a single position that conservatism has on this issue, and it's a tough one. Conservatives hold heterodox views on the issue of immigration reform. So one of my hobby horses, one of my pet issues is making sure that as we have these difficult debates, whether it's on immigration or anything else, that we don't try to purge people out of the movement or the party just because they might have a difference of opinion on any individual tactic or issue position. Now, there was a last-minute change. Helen from Univision is stuck on a flight. She was going to be moderating. I'm going to be moderating now because I'm hoping that she'll get here at least maybe partially through the panel. But I'm pinch hitting as the moderator. But I want to give you, so that my cards are on the table, where I stand on the issue first, so I'm not hiding the football from you guys. I want to be very clear about where I come down on this. I believe that illegal immigration is a complex problem, and that any solution that we come up with needs to strike a balance between Americans' compassionate and welcoming impulses with the fact that we are a sovereign nation where the rule of law must be paramount. So, as such, when we began that push in the Senate, we were watching what was happening in the Gang of 8. I was hopeful that they would come up with a solution that was workable. Unfortunately, as I read more about the bill and as more information and data became available, I determined for myself that I could not in good conscience support that particular bill. And perhaps we'll delve into some of the details why when we get to our panel, but I think my concerns can be distilled down to 2 points. I was unconvinced that the proposed law would actually deal with the problem once and for all the way we were told it would. And also, I simply do not trust this administration to play by the rules. Those are my 2 big concerns. So, that is one guy's opinion. We have a lot more opinions to come, so let's meet our distinguished panel. Up first, you've seen him already from this dais today. Grover Norquist is the president of American for Tax Reform. Then we have Helen Kriebel, who is the founder and president of the Vernon K. Kriebel Foundation. And we have the Honorable Eric Schmidt, who is representing the people of Missouri's 15th District in the Missouri State Senate. So let's begin with Grover. We'll go down the list, and then we'll engage in some questions and some of your questions as well.
Immigration is interesting partially for the reason that was given, that there's not agreement in the conservative movement, as there is on not raising taxes or having school choice, and some of the other issues that seem clear-cut, and almost all conservatives fall on the same side. I want to start by pointing out immigration's extremely important to our past and extremely important to our future, which is why when we get to the question of how come we don't seem to share necessarily a common vision, it's a problem. First of all, if you had to pick 2 or 3 things that make the United States different from all the other countries in the world, low taxes. When we were a colony, we were paying 2% of our income in taxes. Our oppressors, the Brits in London, were paying 20% for the privilege of oppressing us. We paid 2%, and that was completely unacceptable, and we had a war over the subject. Okay? So we've gotten a little soft on the whole tax issue over the years. But the other 2 issues are property rights. We established different understanding of property rights, people actually owning it, owning everything down into the land than Europe had. We didn't have any of this overlapping feudal, king owns everything, somebody else owns pieces of it. We had a much clearer property rights. And the third was immigration. You wanted to come to the United States, you came to the United States. We didn't have laws about who could come across the border till 1888 when we wrote a very snotty anti-Chinese Chinese Exclusion Act, which then banned all Chinese people from coming to the United States and wasn't repealed until 1843. So we've had 3 things that distinguish us: low taxes, immigration, large quantities of immigration, and property rights stronger than the rest of the world. It's why we grew. It's how we ended up with religious liberty. We weren't all one thing. So option 1 may have been make everybody choose my religion. That wasn't an option. Option 2 was everybody gets to do what they want, because that's the only way to protect me. A lot of our freedoms come from the fact that we had folks from all sorts of different backgrounds. Going into the future, we're the future, and China isn't, and Japan isn't, and Europe isn't. 1, because they forget to have kids. But 2, they can't do immigration, and we can. If we wanted the million smartest guys out of Europe tomorrow, we could do it. If we wanted all the engineers in the world, we could do it. And it's the Romans had a spear, which they threw, and it was made so weak that after it hit you or your shield and did you in or stuck in your shield, it then bent. One-way weapon. Okay? Immigration is a political tool we can use and others can't. If we have an argument with Saudi Arabia, we can say, how would your plumbers like to come to the United States? And none of their plumbing would work. But they can't do that back to us. Okay? They go, oh yeah? Well, we'll take all your doctors. No, you won't. There isn't any country that can play this game with us. China is getting old before it gets rich. China's got a declining working population coming up, and it's going to get more egregious I'm old enough to remember when Japan was supposed to be finishing us off and being the future, and they forgot to have kids, and they don't do immigration for various cultural reasons. We've seen the Europeans have all the same problems. We're going to be running the next 100 years largely because we do immigration. With all the problems we have now, we still do it better than most other people. But it's been important to our history, and it's important to our future. So it's probably important to focus on what we do right and wrong. Why do we have this dispute within the right? One of the reasons is that people look at one thing and they think they're talking about immigration. I had an interesting conversation with John O'Sullivan, who used to run, at the time was running the National Review magazine, and he gave a speech. He said, we got all these people coming into the country and they go on welfare and they become Democrats. This is bad. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, you gave a great speech about the evils of welfare. Why did you say you were giving a talk on immigration? Most of the people in this country whose lives are blighted by welfare were born here, as were their parents and their parents' parents. Yeah, some people can get on welfare. It can come over here and theoretically get on welfare, but that's a fraction of the welfare problem. Why would you not want to address the welfare problem? And he said, well, you know, of course you're correct, but we can't reform welfare. This is back in the 70s, 80s, and we can close the border. Well, turned out to have been wrong on both of those, at least over the last 30 years. And then we got into, more recently, some of the critics of immigration. They say if you allow immigrants, they'll be expensive. There's a recent study done by Heritage. What they did was they point out that an immigrant comes in, and for the next 20 years, tremendous asset in terms of resources to the country, but when they go on Medicare, they'll get 3 times back compared to what they put in. This is true of anybody born in the country. This is not a question of immigration. We have a Medicare system that pays out more than it takes in taxes, and everybody born in the country is, according to this, a problem. Okay? If you believe immigrants are a problem because of welfare or the welfare system or because of the entitlements program, that's an argument against kids. It's not an argument against immigrants. And children and immigrants are resources. People are resources. It's the left that thinks that people irritate Gaia and Mother Earth and are a problem, okay? People are not a problem. Zero population growth is a stupid policy. It is not an economic policy. The Chinese have tried it. It doesn't work. And so, one, do we need to reform welfare? Yes, we did a piece of it, but there are 185 different means-tested welfare programs. We block granted one of them. Okay, good for us. That was nice. But we need to do the other 184. We need to reform entitlements. That's what the Ryan budget plan is. And it does just that. And it fixes it not just for somebody who comes here from Korea, but it fixes it for the several hundred million people who are born here and whose parents were born here. So we need to separate out our flawed welfare system, which needs to be reformed, and our problematic system on entitlement, which needs to be reformed, and our education system. Well, immigrants come here. They don't learn English very well, and they don't learn our history. I was born in this country. I went to one of those public schools. They didn't teach us history very well, and a lot of the kids came out of that school not speaking very good English. We have a failed public school system. If there were no immigrants in the world, if it was just us, no French people, well, no, I'm getting carried away. Anyway, if there was, it might work though. If there were no other countries, if it was just us, we would have an education problem. We would have an entitlement problem, and we'd have a welfare problem. Conflating those with immigration is a huge challenge and makes us miss what we need to be focused on. Luckily, the Ryan plan solves both the welfare and the entitlement problem and helps on growth in terms of taxes. School choice does education. So that said, I know we're going to hear more about this, but the most important thing we can do to secure the border is to have a guest worker program that's robust. We did this once. Eisenhower did it. When Eisenhower set up the Bracero program, before that, there are about 1 million people a year being arrested. Then he said, if you want to come in the country, if there's a job for you, here's a pass. You can go to the job. You want to go home again, you can. And, but you can stay as long as there's work for you there. When we did that, arrests went down to 40,000. That you can manage. 1 million you can't. And then when the unions killed this, Bracero program, when the unions got our friend John F. Kennedy and LBJ to kill it, we went back to arresting 1 million people a year at the border, and we had the illegal immigration problem. Because we had a bottleneck on work visas, we ended up with the illegal immigration problem that we have today. We need to fix that, and that we can fix. So I look forward to hearing the others. I know several people have put a lot of thought into how to do those things, but let's never fail to solve one problem because we confuse it with another. Thanks.
Hello. Our principles, as we all talked about today and we all know, come from our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And if we are to continue to be the freest country on earth, every piece of legislation needs to fall within this framework. So what are some of our core principles, conservative principles, as they relate to a discussion of immigration? We believe in limited government and lower taxes, not growing government. We believe in free markets, supply and demand, and a vital private sector in which we as individuals are free to succeed or fail without interference. We believe in the rule of law, but not in a massive police state controlled by the government. We believe in secure borders which protect our national sovereignty, but not borders that don't allow people to come through the proper processes. We believe in all men are created equal, which means no special deals for special groups. And we believe in a moral and humane solution to our problems. So with these principles in mind, the choice for immigration is, currently, either grow the economy or grow the government. The Senate bill grows the government. A simple guest worker program that grows the economy should be the cornerstone of any immigration reform. A number of House members right now are working hard to structure a guest worker program that will actually work. We know it has to be flexible. The numbers should be based on actual employer demand, not government quotas, and the implementation must be simple. I believe the House can accomplish that, but at the moment, the guest worker program is focused only on future foreign workers. This leaves unresolved the most difficult part of the problem, which is how to manage the millions of people already in the US illegally. The Senate bill offers these people only one choice: citizenship. Citizenship. That approach grants a temporary legal status to millions before a criminal background check and without requiring that they have a job. At the end of 8 years, they must either be on a path to citizenship or leave the country. However, many of these workers don't want to be citizens. They just want to work. And giving citizenship to people whose only qualification is their physical presence in the US is contrary to our principles and devalues citizenship. Anybody can apply for US citizenship at any time, and these workers should also be allowed to apply. But that process is a different path. It is more complicated and it takes longer because citizenship is reserved for people who truly understand what it means to be American. That means they must understand our history, our culture, our language, and be fully committed to the American form of government with both their minds and their hearts. So citizenship should be hard to earn, but being able to work should be easy. For most of the people in this country illegally, the same simple guest worker permits available to new foreign workers could be much faster and more efficient. The requirements should be very simple. Pass a criminal background check and prove you have a job. Congress should make this the first step, not a complicated path to citizenship, which grows government and its costs. Making a simple work permit the first step would demonstrate strong leadership and the compassion to do something right away, not next year or the year after that, or maybe even 2015, as they're talking about now. With a practical, flexible, market-based guest worker program in place, border security would be easier and the economy would grow and prosper. We all understand the importance of border security, but we have tried to achieve it the same way for many years without accomplishing it. It is commonly said that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is a definition of insanity. Spending billions on bigger walls and more border agents alone without a guest worker program has not worked. Each time we add to the border security forces and the fences, they still come across those borders illegally. In a recent poll, more than 70% of American voters said absolute border security is not possible without a guest worker program. 70%. Americans believe that, slightly different topic, Americans believe that all men are created equal under the law, so there should be no special deals for special groups. Yet many bills being considered include special deals for people in agriculture, high-tech people, dreamers, athletes, and in my own state of Colorado, ski instructors. If the government allows only 300,000 agricultural workers, and there is a demand for 3 million, the rest will simply come illegally, and businesses will hire them rather than close their doors. And the problem will not be solved, it will be repeated. A better approach is no categories and equal treatment. The same process then works for all employers and all workers. We know that small businesses create the most jobs. Legislation creating a hiring process that is too complicated, cumbersome, and expensive for small business won't work, won't create the jobs our economy needs, and won't solve the problem. A simple guest worker program will. We believe in growing the economy, not the government. Yet many people worry about foreign workers taking jobs from Americans. The question is not how to slice the pie. The question is how to grow the pie. In fact, we know that every foreign worker who takes an unfilled job creates work for 2 or 3 American workers. The more productive workers, the more the economy grows, and the more prosperous America will be. A study just released by the Independent Institution concludes that government meddling in the foreign labor market is largely responsible for the illegal immigration mess. So why add to the mess with even more government control of yet another sector of our economy? Thank you.
Well, welcome to St. Louis. Many of you I know are from in town, but I know there's some folks from out of town. I grew up on the other side of this river in St. Louis County and represent a large portion of St. Louis County, and it's nice to see so many people here. And I have to say, when CPAC came to town this year, the Cardinals did clinch the Central Division, so we're hoping they come back every year. It is fitting, I think, also that we are here in St. Louis and talking about this topic. St. Louis, of course, is the gateway to the West. So many folks came from different places and left this place starting their new life. And so I think for us to have this conversation here and what is the appropriate path is appropriate for the actual setting that we're in. The immigration debate is as old as our republic. In many ways, we are a nation of immigrants. Each one of us has a story of an ancestor of ours that came from somewhere else with little in their pocket, maybe alone, maybe with their family, not much more than hopes and dreams. And collectively, that effort individually led to this new world that we have in what is America. And in many ways, immigrants have shaped and defined what America is in 2013. In 2013, there is an immigration reform debate that is going on in Washington, D.C. and is taking place there and confronts two equally challenging issues: confronting the problem of illegal immigration and also addressing legal immigration reform as well. And those are two very separate issues. This president, Barack Obama, it's very hard to figure out what his immigration strategy is. As best I can tell is to destroy our healthcare system so nobody wants to come here. But I think it's our job to lead in an intellectual and thoughtful way. Ronald Reagan once said that a nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation. And in fact, you could argue that the very essence of being a sovereign nation is the ability to control your borders. It is a duty that is bestowed under our Constitution. And as had been noted before, so many things that happen from Washington, D.C. are outside of those bounds, outside of those limits that were set by our founding fathers. This is a responsibility that does need to take place and a conversation that needs to be had because the status quo simply is not working. Indeed, what is troubling in 2013 is that we have a federal government willing to spy on its own people, yet refuses to enforce its own laws and control its own borders. Thus, confronting the problem of illegal immigration means securing our borders first. All discussion flows from it, and I would say that our credibility on all the other issues depend on that. The other issue that deserves serious debate is reforming our current legal immigration process. The examples that we all could point to in our family tree took place through a legal immigration and naturalization process. And in the Senate, I have the honor of, here in Missouri, of chairing the Jobs and the Economic Development Committee. And having a legal and orderly and thought-out immigration policy can help lead to economic development. It has been noted before by both speakers. And I have to put a plug in now as the Senate handler of the tax cut bill. So do lower taxes. If you believe that people go to the more attractive places, we have to recognize our reality around us and lower Missouri's tax rate so we can be competitive. But that does lead to economic expansion. People come here for opportunities, and the folks that come here legally are seeking a new life. We're here in St. Louis, and if you look at St. Louis's history, some of the great companies that we know very well were founded by immigrants. Eberhard Anheuser, Adolphus Busch were German immigrants who had an upstart brewery among hundreds in this town. And with a last name like Schmidt, I'm very proud of that lineage here in St. Louis. But that entrepreneurial spirit has spanned centuries in this United States that we have. And that's true today. In 2011, immigrants started 28% of all new businesses in this country, comprising only 13% of the population. A lot of them are small businesses, and a lot of them are high-tech upstarts. Moreover, it only makes sense for people who are coming here looking for opportunity, who are being educated in our institutions of higher learning like Washington University and St. Louis University, for us to want them to start their new careers here, to create jobs here, to expand our economy here. So, having a secure border first and fulfilling the protections that are granted in our Constitution and defining what it means to be sovereign are important, and also making legal reforms to make our current immigration process more streamlined and more effective. The immigration debate can capture the best of what we're about here in America: self-reliance, self-determination, respect for the rule of law, and that if you work hard enough and play by the rules, you can succeed. That is the American dream. So this panel is here to explore some of those issues around that immigration debate. But at the end of the day, this issue will be settled in Washington, D.C. and by Congress. So I encourage everyone to let them know how you feel about it. They certainly work for you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to kick off just a discussion up here, and if you have additional questions that you want to add to our discussion, there are cards where you can write your questions down and then hand them off to volunteers. We already got a small mountain of them gathering right here, but we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. I want to start with the credibility problem and the trust deficit that exists between the American public and Washington, D.C., because Senator, you just mentioned this is an issue that will be settled by Congress, and I think what we're seeing on a separate issue, on a separate track right now, is Obamacare, where you're seeing shattered promises, missed deadlines, swelling costs, waivers and carve-outs, unlawful delays, exemptions. It's a huge mess. It's a big governmental, experimental undertaking, and conservatives sit back and say, that is a huge failure involving 1/6 of our economy, healthcare. Why on earth would we entrust this exact same group of people to successfully and competently reform immigration? How can Congress and Washington answer the American people credibly on that question?
I'll tackle it first. I think one of the important things, and one of the things, I think it's still, it was originally in that Senate version, and I think as it made its way over to the House, was a trigger that it set up a bureaucracy to determine whether or not the border was, 90% secure before you could go in to trigger some of the other reforms that were in the bill. And I think that presents a unique challenge because there's very little accountability. If we think that there's a distrust of Congress, there certainly is a distrust of a faceless bureaucrat out there that's going to be determining such a major piece of policy like immigration reform. So I know there's a discussion out there about Congress determining when that happens, because that's all part of what happens first. But clearly there is a distrust of whether or not what people say is going to happen is actually going to happen, and who's going to make that decision. Congress, I would argue, is at least accountable to the people.
Well,
supposed to be.
Yeah. The argument, gee, if you pass an immigration law, the president might fiddle with it. Okay, that halfway sounds like it makes sense until you say, we do have an immigration law and the president's fiddling with it now. You're telling me you don't want to fix that, and you can change the laws to make it clearer that the president or his appointees don't have the kind of leverage that he claims they do. He's sort of announced we're not enforcing certain laws. They've been going after businesses that hire who are they don't appreciate, as opposed to, that they would like to unionize, and using INS guys for political purposes at present. I would hope that immigration reform would strip from this president some of the powers that he claims for himself now. By having it's not like the present law is being enforced reasonably by the president, and if we had a new one, he might cheat. No, he's cheating with what we got. That's part of reforming immigration.
I think the Senate bill is probably gone in its wholity, but it was going to be another Obamacare-type bill. It was very long, very involved. It had to set up many new processes, new committees, hire certainly 100,000 new people to do this, all of whom had to be trained. And if it went into effect, it would be chaos, huge chaos. And rightly, in the hands of the federal government, this is not a good idea to put that huge a sector of our economy into their hands, the whole foreign labor market. So, and with them deciding, is the border 90% secure? The government's going to tell us that? How many workers are needed in every single sector of our economy? The government's going to tell us that? I mean, I may have one house to build this year, and I may have 500 to build next year. So the number of workers, foreign workers I need, are not going to be the same. And Washington's going to keep track of that? So this whole thing was really completely out of order. And that's why I think we need to look at a simple plan, something that's doable, something that can be done in the private sector and fill the needs of private business. We should look to ourselves to solve this problem and to deal with this. But at the same time, we have to remember 70 million baby boomers who are working will retire. And there are only 40+ million to take their place. So when you are looking at jobs that are going begging in the United States, we better not forget about foreign workers who would like to come, live, work with us without citizenship.
When you're talking about reforming immigration, it's important to remember recent history on this last 100 years. The restrictionists who wanted to limit the number of people who could come in have been organized by organized labor for the last 100 years. The Chinese Exclusion Act was pushed by Samuel Gompers and the AFL/CIO. The Japanese Exclusion Act, which was going to do the Japanese what we did to the Chinese, was pushed the same way. Each of these restrictions have been pushed by organized labor because they see it as a way to cartelize the economy. Moving forward, in 1986, Reagan wanted to do something for people who'd been here for quite some time, and to have a guest worker program to manage future flows. And the AFL-CIO said, we're not going to do the guest worker program. And so what you had was a repeat of what happened when Kennedy and Johnson, at the request of the AFL-CIO, request/order, killed the guest worker program back then. So what happened was absolutely predictable, but given to us by organized labor's political clout, which is falling today. Not the same as it was in the 50s, not the same as it was in the mid-50s and 60s. Bush, 43, wanted to move forward on immigration reform in 2007. And they had a bill that was beginning to move forward. The unions wanted to have wage and price controls throughout the economy in it, the Davis-Bacon Act, in the middle of immigration reform, and one Democratic senator walked into the room where they thought they had a deal, and he brought a letter, or bill, and it was his amendment that, with Harry Reid's support, he was going to be introducing at the request of the AFL-CIO, which was to kill the guest worker program. And when he put it on the table, everybody understood that behind him stood the weight of the AFL-CIO and all the Democrats that they controlled, and immigration reform was killed, 2007. You may know the name of the Democrat senator who did that. It's Barack Obama. Okay? He's carrying water for organized labor and killed immigration reform. So the idea that he's terribly excited about immigration reform, the guy who didn't do anything on immigration reform the first year of his presidency when he had supermajorities in the House and the Senate, didn't do anything the second year of his presidency for the same reasons, for a guy who for 700 days woke up in the morning, did nothing on immigration reform, and went to bed and considered it a good day, that he's just burning to do immigration reform strikes me as an odd assertion, given that the one thing he did as a senator was kill immigration reform. He didn't do anything else as a senator prior to becoming president. Understand, when you're talking about congressmen and why don't we do this and we do that, the character, the force in the room is organized labor and their restrictionist policies, and the new addition to that, which is the zero population growth anti-people campaign, which is also very important in this conversation within certain communities.
By the way, Grover, just a quick fact check. You said that President Obama, or then Senator Obama, didn't do anything in the Senate prior to becoming president. And in fact, he did vote against raising the debt ceiling as a U.S. Senator. I just felt I would put that in there, considering that it's a relevant topic these days. He seems to pretend like that never happened in 2006. But I want to address
we beat him on that one.
Yes. So the
We did too,
90%
right?
trigger issue came up twice. And what's interesting about these triggers, because this is what we heard a lot from Senator Rubio and some of the other people who supported this Gang of Eight bill, the 90% trigger number came in from something called the Cornyn Amendment, which was offered by Senator Cornyn from Texas, which would have required 100% operational control of the border and a 90% capture rate for people crossing. That was the proposal that Senator Cornyn put as an amendment. It actually got defeated by the Senate. The only member of the Gang of Eight who voted for it was Marco Rubio. The Democrats called it a poison pill, and it died. What they ended up adopting instead was the so-called border surge, the Hoeven-Corker Amendment, which changed it from a 90% trigger to a 90% goal, which has no teeth behind it. So this comes back to the credibility issue, I think, in my book, because when you have, for instance, the CBO analysis that said even with the border surge and spending all those billions of dollars, you're still going to see illegal immigration continue at roughly half or two-thirds the rate that it currently is, which is an improvement, but it's not by any stretch a solution that we will never have to return to these questions again in 10 or 20 years, which is how the bill is being sold or was being sold. Grover, I'll go to you first. You know, how can defenders of the Senate reform bill credibly say the issue's over if we pass this when the CBO's own analysis proves that's not even close to correct?
Well, the Senate bill was to get something started. No, I don't know anybody who thinks the Senate bill is either going to pass, and the House, which gets next at-bat, has made it clear the Senate bill isn't what they're going to be organizing from or working off of. But the Senate bill makes the same mistake that we made in 2007 and 86 and pre-Racero program, is that it looks at border security as separate from a guest worker program. A guest worker program drops the numbers of problems you have more than the border does, more than the fence would. That's the way to avoid the problem. You can do that and have border security and get much better numbers. But I think the proposal that McCaw, Congressman McCaw of Texas has on border security is much, doesn't require the, large quantities of people and would be much more serious.
So I'm going to call a timeout on the panel real quick because we have a new addition who her flight finally landed. So I'm going to eagerly hand all of these questions over to
don't do that. That's so
our
cool.
originally scheduled moderator, who would...
The moderator finally shows up and has no idea what anybody has said so far. But I am more than delighted to be here. I apologize. It's taken 9 hours to be here. But I really wanted to come for a number of reasons. First of all, this is a very distinguished panel, and it's a very important conversation. My name is Helen Aguirre-Ferre. I'm a journalist. I have a national radio program with Univision America Radio, and I also do work for PBS in South Florida. I am an American of Hispanic origin. It is not true that Hispanics are not conservatives, and one reason I wanted to be here is because on many levels, I'm coming home because I am a conservative, and I couldn't be more delighted to be here. And we need more Hispanics to be able to listen to the conservative message. And it sounds funny to say because many Hispanics are really conservative. Most of us are social conservatives, pro-life, strong family, traditional values, believe in God. Religion is very important. Hard work, good work ethic is so much a part of our daily lives and daily conversation. And yet, when it comes to the issue of immigration reform, and I know this has confounded so many people because when you look at polls, it's not the #1 issue on the list, but that is not to say that it is not a deeply personal issue to us because we are perhaps much more closer to it than you are. I was born in Miami, Florida, but my father is from, and my mother are from Nicaragua. My father's a political exile from 1947. He supported the only democratic election Nicaragua had in the 20th century, which lasted for 10 days before the president, Arguello, was overthrown by the Somoza regime, the first Somoza regime. My father eventually moved to Panama, started a business, a career in journalism, which I developed a love for, and married my mom. Ultimately, was granted political asylum in the United States and moved to the United States, always with the idea, as most political exiles, of going back home. Didn't. We learned Spanish at home because he thought we would never be able to communicate with my grandmother, his mom. English wasn't a problem per se because we had one American grandfather from the great state of Virginia, which is why my name is not Elena, it's Helen. There was a Helen in his life somewhere along the line, and he named my mom Helen, and my name is Helen as well. So this is a real important issue. It's a personal issue, and on many levels, it encompasses the issues that are so important in our nation because it has to do with the economy. It has to do with national security. It has to do with workforce, jobs, education, limited resources. Where do we need to be pulling from? How do we engage the broader conversation? What is today, and even though I say that many of us Hispanics are innately conservative, there's this huge confusion out there as to what is the conservative message when it comes to immigration, and why is it so conflicted. Thank God it's not so harsh as it used to be, because it's okay to disagree, but the tone does make a difference. Mm-hmm. So is there one conservative message? Does there have to be one conservative message? And if there is a few conservative messages, what are they? Grover Norquist, let me start with you.
Well, we've been talking a little bit about the importance to the economy. I mean, we can't be bringing guys in, giving them PhDs, and then throwing them over to India and China. We ought to say, hey, how'd you like to stay here and work? We should have a lot more of the talent, a lot more of the high-tech world coming here and staying and creating jobs here. So we went through some of the numbers on Silicon Valley. But the job creation also happens throughout the economy. You can't have chefs without busboys. You can't have a hotel without lots of different skill levels all the way through. It's not just the high-tech guys that a strong economy needs. And we need to grow as an economy. I think the biggest change in the immigration debate has what you addressed as the tone. Things have gotten better from the conservative side in the last year.
And what, is it just because of the election? Is it because, or is it because there's a recognition, or is it because of something else? I mean, I'm hoping that it's not because we lost an election. I hope it's because it's a recognition. Well, Senator, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think my perspective is, I think tone, you hit it on it, tone is really important. The idea that we are welcoming of people who come through the process legally is really important. And I don't think that is in conflict with saying that we also, as a country, respect the rule of law and want to have secure borders. But I also think it's a recognition now that the Hispanic population is not a monolith.
No.
The issues that are important to my family are the same issues that are important to a Cuban American in South Florida. We're concerned about an ever-growing national debt that has no end. They have the same concerns about handing a $50,000 or $60,000 credit card tab to their kids. They're concerned about a stagnant economy that typically in a recession rebounds relatively quickly afterwards. This is a prolonged recession, primarily because of the failed economic policies of this president. They're concerned about the rising insurance rates that we're going to see under Obamacare in the next year. So I think just having an honest conversation that we have in this country a lot of shared concerns that aren't necessarily exclusive to the immigration debate. And I think that's liberating in many ways for conservatives in the Republican Party.
The elephant in the room is also this sense that some people have, oh my goodness, immigrants won't become Republicans. And
that's absurd.
Well, no, but
I assure you.
I hear it all the time. And in point of fact, if we just look at Canada, the new Canadian Conservative government carries the majority of every minority community in Canada, every last one. How do they do it? They ran ads in all of their magazines and newspapers. They reached out to people. They talked to people. Those Republican candidates in Texas who reach out to the Hispanic community do quite well. People like Tom Tancredo, who when a Hispanic woman who had brought over at age 3, graduated top of her high school class and was pointed out that she wasn't there legally, thought it'd be a good idea to suggest she be deported. He doesn't do very well with the Hispanic community. You know, simply reaching out and talking to people and being there. We used to talk about doing it more with the African American community. We need to do that as well. But each of the various communities that come into the United States throughout history, if you reach out and talk to them, they're available to the modern Republican Party.
There's no question about that, particularly also because it's being respectful. It's saying, you have value, we want to get to know you better, because let's face it, what do political parties do to some degree with voters? You're selling a product. If I'm going to be your potential consumer, why don't you talk to me and don't do it 4 months before the election and then ignore me thereafter? Please, let it be a continuous conversation, because democracy wasn't meant to be a spectator sport. It means that we all have to participate.
Right, I think we're all on board with that notion. I mean, if you show up and you think that one of the parties on your ballot hates you, then you're not probably going to vote for them. It's a barrier to entry. So I think we're all on board. Better tone. You know, I'm in favor of some form of reform. But just to push back a little bit here, Romney lost the Hispanic vote 71 to 27%. That is an astonishing margin. And you can maybe chalk up some of that to tone. You can chalk up some of that to a lack of outreach and the Republicans not doing a good job. But some of that has to also be underlying political preferences, doesn't it?
Can I tell you something? The Republican Party gave me, as a journalist working on Univision America Radio, a real hard time getting interviews, because they had the assumption that it wasn't going to be a friendly interview. And since when are journalists supposed to give friendly interviews anyway? And I will tell you one thing. When I get the opportunity to interview Governor Romney 3 days before he does the interview with Jorge Ramos and Maria Elena Salinas for television, we go through deferred action, what he would do under deferred action. Clever move by the president on that end, I must admit. After we do that, I ask then to speak to the vice presidential candidate, Paul Ryan. And to my shock, I'm told, and this is a quote, the congressman does not do specialty media. That's what you call a potential 50 million voters, specialty media. And you know, in campaigns, if you are not English language, you're catapulted in specialty media. Well, that mindset's got to change. It's hard to send the message when you can't get the messenger to speak to the community. Well, and it's just very, very difficult. Do you mind, Grover, can I get Helen in on here? Helen, you and I, it's great to see you again, Helen. One of the things, too, that comes apart, an important part of this debate is that when we talk about work and we talk about employment, and you've done a lot of work about temporary visas, we always end up losing in this conversation and in the political debate because, first of all, number one, we don't want to recognize that we've got a lot of people who work, a lot of workers, a lot of Americans, we don't want to do the kind of work that immigrants do. It's hard labor. They don't want to be in the hospitality area necessarily, don't want to work out in the fields. Certainly, agriculture is a whole different area. And so we also then have the labor unions who are only looking for how to broaden their base and to bring in more dues for themselves. So they really don't like temporary worker visas. How do we win that dynamic and improve that debate?
It's a tough question. However, my story is that I am a small businesswoman, and I do have H-2B workers, and I've had them for 20 years. They are fabulous people, And if I were unable to fill the empty jobs in my business, I would close my doors and fire my 25 American workers. It's something we have to see in economic terms. And I think that we're conservatives. We have to be true to our conservative principles. And that means that we need to come up with a solution to this, now particularly when the House is discussing all different kinds of plans that they can put forward in a House proposal to solve this. I go back to, we need to get our act together. Let's talk a minute about border security. What would get people to go through a gate in the border? What would be their incentive so strong that they would not even consider coming across that border illegally, which is the key to border security? They would come across if they thought they could get a legal guest worker permit efficiently, easily, and a job. That's what it takes. And if we can prove that, and prove that leave to the American employer the people that they need for their businesses and get it out of government's hands, I think you would have the support of unbelievable numbers of businesses across America. And once you have that grassroots support, then talk to the unions, then talk to the Democrats in Congress, because we will have a solution to this issue. That's what's important.
But don't we have, I mean, we're hearing now that we can't get immigration reform probably because the calendar's so full now, because there's so many unforeseen events. We've been talking about this easily since 2006. What more is there to say that we haven't said? What is going to change? What's going to change the dynamic? Grover, I was cutting you off.
Well, I was going to point out that when we say people talk about Hispanics, I mean, we used to carry the Asian American vote, now we get creamed by it, partially because of all the questions of not doing outreach, and when people talk about them, a lot of people think them means them. And so the damage is not just with the Hispanic vote when some Republicans speak intemperately on immigration. Talk to Jewish Americans who've been here for 100 years. They still think often of themselves as immigrants and or the target of the anti-immigrant language, and talk to your Irish American friends, okay? So a lot of people have been through this ringer, and it becomes very personal to them. And they think you don't like them. And then it's very difficult to have them listen to all the stuff you want to talk about. It's very difficult to listen
when you think someone really doesn't like you.
As to or they're about to deport your mother. That also gets in the way of the conversation. The other challenge you have, coming up, I think we're going to see something November, December. Goodlatte, who runs the committee, Judiciary Committee, will likely do something on border security, on the Dreamers. These are the kids who came over when they were 3 and 4 and are now of an age to go to school or would like to be able to join the military, some of them, making that easier. Possibly also rifle shot stuff on military service as a gateway to staying. There are a number of things there. The high-tech community is very interested in, I mean, there are a whole bunch of people going to Canada because Microsoft is hiring people in Canada because they can't get them across the border of the United States. And nobody should have to live in Canada. It's just not fair. It's cold and they have accents.
It's dark.
Yeah, it's dark. So there are a whole series of never mind the farming community and others. So I think there are a series of rifle shot issues that could move. And then it gets past this issue of the Republicans have some heck no caucus. Mm-hmm. And once that's been cleared that that's not the case, then you can enter a negotiation as to what else wouldn't.
So guys, what else? And the what else is 11 million approximately undocumented workers, right?
What Grover's talking about, though, is special deals for special groups. And it's not American. It really doesn't. It's one of the things that irks me the very most when one person gets a deal and another doesn't. We need a law that's uniform across here. And I am so encouraged because there are a number of people in the House who are talking about legitimate guest worker programs that are uniform across the line, not just for one group or another group, and would really legalize guest workers in this country, not just future flow. And I think that's just a critically important discussion that's taking place now, and I am always an optimist, so maybe I'm being unrealistic, but I think at least the conversation will come public.
You're talking about broad immigration reform, integral immigration reform, instead of taking it in a compartmentalized way, right?
What I'm talking about is a solution to the guest worker situation. I think it should be the first piece of legislation that should come up because it is the easiest, simplest piece that can uniformly solve a lot of the problem.
Guy, for a lot of Hispanics, the issue is, well, what do we do with the 11 million undocumented? And though people may not recognize them because for some they're in the shadows, for those of us who are in the Hispanic community, we know who they are because some of us employ them, because we go to the same schools, we're certainly in the same churches, we're in the community or the broader community. So is that what sinks or swims this deal?
Maybe. I mean, and you can talk about, is it going to be a path to citizenship, a path to normalization? Will it be different for the dreamers versus adults? These are sticking points that will have to be worked out. I just want to make one last point on tone, because we've had unanimity up here about how conservatives need to be better about how we talk about this and treat people like human beings. That has to go both ways, because there are people on the other side of this debate, on the left side of the aisle, who take every opportunity to call us haters, mean-spirited, to distort our words, even when we are speaking carefully. And I think that they drive a wedge because it benefits them politically. And I think it's up to people who are serious about this issue and reform on the other side to call off their attack dogs, because when I, as someone who supports reform, hear someone else screaming that I'm a hater just because I think that we have a right to defend our sovereign borders, that really turns me off. So this is a two-way street. When it comes to tone.
And I understand that it turns you off, but you're also getting politically played because you're being politically played because, you know, you just have to have a national radio show to get these calls and to hear the vitriol that comes out. And Senator, I know that you must be a real fan of being on those, you know, radio shows too, to hear people, you know, give you an earful. But know that you're being politically played, and we have to recognize that the Democrats have done a really good job with that. And I personally think that there's a big risk for immigration reform with the big marches that they're proposing October 5th, which is, you know, a double-edged sword. I would much rather see American citizens going out and doing that march in favor of that than having people who may not be here legally and saying, well, why are you doing that? You're sending all the wrong messages. And please, if you're going to wave a flag, have it be the flag of the United States of America at a very minimum, you know? So, but we also have to remember, and I can, and this I'll put my hand in the fire and I'll swear to you, Senator, and to all of you, that when I speak to the Hispanic community, and many of them undocumented, look, everybody wants legal immigration, but there have to be laws that also make it easier to emigrate here, because when you're desperate and hungry, you do just about anything to be able to provide for your family. And I think if we were all desperate and if we were all hungry, we would try to do the same thing. At the same time, when we look at this conversation and we look at the way Democrats, you know, there are a lot of people here who would say that we need to make dramatic changes to make legal immigration easier to do. You talk about border security, 45% come here overstaying their visas. They actually come here legally. How do we do this in a way that's smarter?
Well, I think you've got the issue then of credibility, sort of looping this all back around on the enforcement issue. In a lot of states, in Missouri, for example, has taken steps for enforcement, but this is a part of this national conversation that needs to take place so that the federal government who is designing a uniform immigration policy, we have some credibility on the enforcement issue. And we just haven't seen that. And I think that's part of the distrust that holds this up.
I really, I'm so sorry that I got here late, because I could go on here forever with this distinguished panel. But I will tell you one thing in my conversations with the undocumented community in particular. As much as they would love the privilege of eventually becoming US citizens, what they really want is the opportunity to be able to stay in this country without fear of deportation, work and enrich this country and their children without taking anything from the government. They do pay taxes. They are, by and large, good people. This administration has deported nearly 1.6 million, which is more than any other. Almost 50% of them had no legal infractions against them, except that they weren't here legally. The other 50%, if you break the law, other than being here without documentation, which is a civil violation, not a felony. If you have a felony, out. But for all of the other people, they're really good people. They're just good people like we all are. And I hope we change this conversation and make it a win-win. And Helen, I'm with you. It's what the United States is all about. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I need to come back to St. Louis. It's a great audience. Thank you.